2 in the morning, a cold ICU room. The only sounds were the steady beep of machines and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Emmett Hartwell knelt beside the hospital bed of the most powerful CEO in the city. His wrinkled dress shirt was still stained with blood from the accident. His ribs ached with every breath. But he did not care about any of that. He cared only about the woman lying motionless before him, Celeste Ashford, 38 years old, founder and CEO of Ashford Industries. A woman who commanded boardrooms and terrified competitors. A woman who had never once looked at him as anything more than a piece of furniture in her office. And yet, Emmett reached for her hand. Her skin was cool beneath his fingers. Her face was pale against the white pillow, her dark hair loose and tangled in a way he had never seen before. She had always been so composed, so untouchable. Now she looked fragile, human. He leaned closer and whispered the confession he had hidden for 3 years. I love you, Celeste. I have loved you since the first week I started working for you. I never said anything because I knew you did not want it. I knew I was nothing to you, and I accepted that. Being near you was enough. His voice cracked. Please do not leave. Please wake up. You are the only one I have loved since Margot died. The machines beeped steadily. Celeste did not move. No one knew if she could hear him. No one knew if she would ever wake up. But the most terrifying thing was not death. It was the possibility that if she did wake up, she would look at him the same way she always had, as if he did not exist. What Emmett did not know was that Celeste could hear everything. She existed in a strange twilight state, conscious but paralyzed, aware of every word, every touch, every whispered confession, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to open her eyes. She heard everything he said. And for the first time in 38 years, the woman who had built an empire on the belief that vulnerability was weakness felt something crack open inside her chest. She wanted to reach for him. She wanted to tell him she heard. She wanted to apologize for every time she had looked through him as if he were made of glass. But her body refused to obey, and so she lay there crying inside, while the man who loved her poured out his heart to what he believed was an unconscious woman. 3 days before the accident, Emmett Hartwell woke at 5:30 in the morning to the sound of his daughter climbing onto his bed. Willa was 7 years old, gap-toothed, brown hair that refused to stay in any ponytail he attempted. She pressed her cold feet against his shin and whispered that she had a nightmare about dinosaurs eating her science project. Emmett pulled her close and told her the dinosaurs were vegetarians. She considered this information seriously, nodded, then fell back asleep within minutes. He did not. By 6:15, he was in the kitchen frying eggs while Willa sat at the table with her homework spread out like a battle map. She was building a model of the solar system using foam balls and wire hangers. She had already glued Saturn's rings on upside down. Emmett noticed but did not correct her. He had learned over the years that mistakes were part of the process. Willa learned best when she discovered problems herself. Besides, there was something beautiful about an imperfect Saturn. It was still Saturn, just a different version. He plated the eggs, added toast, set the food in front of her without comment. She ate while explaining that Jupiter was technically a failed star. He listened as if hearing it for the first time, even though she had told him the same fact at least a dozen times before. At 7:30, he dropped her off at school and watched her run toward the building with her backpack bouncing against her spine. She did not look back. She never did. She was too busy rushing toward whatever adventure awaited her. Emmett sat in the car for an extra moment, watching, remembering. He had been raising Willa alone since his wife died 4 years ago. Margot. She had been a quiet woman, the kind of person who noticed things others missed. She had seen Emmett when no one else did, had loved him for exactly who he was, not for what he could provide or what he might become, just for him. And then one morning she had collapsed in the kitchen. Brain aneurysm. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. Willa had been 3 years old. She barely remembered her mother now. Just fragments, the smell of lavender lotion, a lullaby about stars and sleep, the warmth of arms that no longer existed. Emmett remembered everything. In the years since Margot's death, he had learned to measure love not by grand gestures, but by small repeating acts. Scrambled eggs at dawn, clean uniforms laid out the night before, bedtime stories read in funny voices until Willa giggled herself to sleep. The architecture of devotion was built from things no one else noticed. By 8, he was at Ashford Industries, riding the elevator to the 42nd floor, with a tablet in one hand and Celeste Ashford's schedule memorized in his head. He had been her executive assistant for 3 years. In that time, he had become fluent in the silent language of her needs. She drank black coffee at 8:15. No sugar, no cream. Exactly 180 degrees. She reviewed quarterly reports at 9. Took calls from the board at 10. She never ate lunch, though Emmett ordered it anyway, and left it on her desk in case she changed her mind. She never did. She rarely smiled. She moved through her days with the precision of someone who had learned early that hesitation was weakness, that showing softness was an invitation for others to take advantage. Emmett had loved her from the first week. He had not meant to. Love was not something he had planned for after his wife's death. Certainly not love for a woman who barely acknowledged his existence outside of work functions. But Celeste had a way of existing that made the world feel both larger and lonelier. She was brilliant and cold and entirely unreachable. And Emmett found himself drawn to the contradiction. He wondered what she was like when no one was watching. He wondered if she ever got tired of being strong. He wondered if anyone had ever seen past the armor to the woman underneath. He accepted his role as the man who stood behind her, unseen, essential, a ghost in her peripheral vision. The morning passed in the usual rhythm. Celeste arrived at 8:10, walked past his desk without greeting, disappeared into her office. Emmett brought her coffee at 8:15. She took it without looking up from her screen. At 9, he placed the quarterly reports on her desk. At 10, he transferred the board call to her line. At noon, he ordered her lunch, knowing she would not eat it. At 3, he rescheduled a meeting she had forgotten. At 5, he reminded her of a dinner with investors. She nodded. He left. This was the shape of their relationship. Professional, distant, built on the understanding that Emmett's job was to anticipate her needs before she articulated them, and Celeste's job was to pretend she did not need anyone at all. But that morning, Emmett heard something that planted a seed of unease in his mind. Celeste was on a call with her brother, Sterling Ashford, 2 years older than her, the kind of man who smiled with his mouth but never with his eyes. Emmett was not supposed to listen, but the door was not fully closed, and Sterling's voice carried through the gap. "You are making a mistake, Celeste. The board will not support you forever. Father's shares should have gone to me. You know that. Everyone knows that." Celeste's response was ice. "Father gave them to me for a reason, Sterling. He saw what you are. Do not call me again." The line went dead. Emmett pretended he had heard nothing, but he filed the information away. Something about Sterling's tone unsettled him. It was not anger. It was calculation, the voice of a man making plans. That evening at 7 o'clock, when most of the office had emptied and the cleaning crew was vacuuming the hallways, Celeste appeared in the doorway of Emmett's small workspace. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. Her jacket was off. Her hair was slightly loosened from its usual tight knot. And there was something in her expression that Emmett had never seen before. Vulnerability. She said his name. Just his name. "Emmett." He looked up from his computer, surprised. In 3 years, she had never sought him out after hours, never lingered, never treated him as anything other than a function. "Can you drive me home?" she asked. "My driver called in sick. I do not feel like taking a cab. Emmett said yes before his brain could process the request. He gathered his things, turned off his computer, followed her to the parking garage where his 10-year-old sedan sat between two luxury cars that cost more than his annual salary. Celeste did not comment on the car. She slid into the passenger seat, fastened her seatbelt, stared out the window as Emmett navigated out of the garage and onto the street. The city lights blurred past them, reflecting off the glass towers that lined the avenue. The silence between them was thick but not uncomfortable, just present, like a third passenger. For the first 5 minutes, neither of them spoke. Emmett kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel, aware of her presence in a way that felt almost physical. She smelled like expensive perfume and coffee. Her breathing was slow, controlled. Even in exhaustion, she maintained her composure. Then she asked him a question no one had ever asked before. "How do you do it, Emmett?" He glanced at her briefly. "Do what?" "All of it. Being a single father. Working these hours. Always putting everyone else first." She paused. "How do you not lose yourself in the process?" Emmett did not answer immediately. He changed lanes, signaled, merged into traffic. He thought about Willa asleep in her bed, about the eggs he would fry in the morning, about the 3 years he had spent loving a woman who did not know he existed outside of his function. Finally, he told her the truth. "Putting other people first is not about losing myself. It is about understanding that my value is not measured by what I keep. It is measured by what I give." He paused. "Being a father taught me that love is not a transaction. It is a choice made every day in small ways. Making breakfast even when I am tired. Reading bedtime stories even when I have work to do. Showing up even when it is hard. That is where meaning comes from. Not from what I get back, from what I give." Celeste listened without interrupting. When he finished, she turned to look at him for the first time since they had gotten in the car. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something softer in her eyes, something that looked almost like recognition. "I have never thought about it that way," she said quietly. "I have spent my entire life believing that vulnerability was failure." She looked away, out the window, at the city lights streaming past. "My father died when I was 12. Heart attack. Sudden. No warning. He was there at breakfast and gone by dinner." Her voice dropped. "My mother responded by becoming harder, colder. She taught me that emotions were weakness, that needing anyone was dangerous, that the only person I could rely on was myself." She paused. "My brother Sterling, he has always seen everything as competition. We were raised to fight each other for scraps of approval that never came. Our father left his shares to me, not Sterling. Sterling has never forgiven me for that." Another pause. Longer this time. "I am tired, Emmett. I am so tired of being alone, of trusting no one, of sleeping in an empty apartment and waking up to silence." Emmett did not know what to say. He kept driving, feeling the space between them shrink in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. For the first time in 3 years, Celeste Ashford was not his boss. She was just a woman sitting in his car, admitting that she was exhausted, admitting that she was lonely. And Emmett was not just her assistant. He was a man who had learned to carry love quietly, who had built a life around the idea that some things were worth protecting, even if they would never belong to him. They were 2 blocks from her apartment when the truck ran the red light. Emmett saw it half a second before impact, a flash of metal and headlights coming from the right side. His brain processed the trajectory, calculated the angle, understood with perfect clarity that the truck would hit the passenger side first, where Celeste was sitting. He did not think. He turned the wheel hard to the left, threw his body between the collision and her. The world exploded into noise and glass and darkness. Metal screamed against metal. Airbags deployed. The car spun once, twice. Emmett felt his ribs crack, felt his head slam against something hard, felt the world tilt and spin and then go terribly, horribly still. He could not see. He could not breathe. But he could hear Celeste's voice, faint, far away, calling his name. He wanted to answer. He wanted to tell her he was fine. He wanted to ask if she was hurt. But the darkness pulled him under before he could speak. And the last thing he thought before he lost consciousness was that he had made the right choice. He had put himself between her and death. And if that was the last thing he ever did, it would be enough. Emmett woke in a hospital bed 6 hours after the accident. Fractured ribs, concussion, bruises that covered half his body, and Willa asleep in the chair beside him, her small face streaked with dried tears, her hand wrapped tightly around his fingers. Mrs. Pemberton, the kind neighbor who watched Willa when Emmett worked late, sat in the corner. She looked relieved when Emmett opened his eyes. A nurse told him he was lucky. A doctor told him his quick reflexes had likely saved both their lives. A police officer told him the other driver had been drunk, had run the red light, had fled the scene but been caught 2 miles away. But no one told him about Celeste. No one mentioned her name. And when Emmett finally found the strength to ask, the nurse's expression shifted into something careful, something sad. Miss Ashford is in the ICU, she said. She sustained a head injury during the collision. She has not woken up yet. Emmett's chest tightened. Will she? The nurse hesitated. The doctors are not sure. We are monitoring her closely. 3 days later, Emmett was discharged with instructions to rest and a prescription for pain medication he did not intend to take. Willa held his hand as they walked to the parking lot. Her grip was tight enough to hurt his bruised fingers, but he did not pull away. She had been terrified, and fear in children left marks that took longer to heal than broken bones. On the drive home, she asked the question he had been dreading. Daddy, is Miss Ashford going to die? Emmett looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were wide, searching his face for reassurance he was not sure he could give. I do not know, sweetheart. The doctors are taking care of her. Is it your fault? The question hit him like a second collision. No, he said. It was not my fault. A drunk driver ran a red light. There was nothing I could have done to prevent it. But the words felt hollow, because he could not stop thinking about the what-ifs. What if he had taken a different route? What if they had left the office 5 minutes earlier? What if he had not agreed to drive her home at all? That night, after Willa fell asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit, Emmett stood in his dark kitchen and stared at the phone number the hospital had given him for the ICU. He had no official right to information about Celeste's condition. He was not family. He was not her partner. He was not listed as an emergency contact. He was just her assistant, an employee, nobody. But the nurse who had handed him the number had looked at him with something like understanding. And she had told him to call after visiting hours if he wanted to know how Celeste was doing. Emmett called at 11. The nurse told him there was no change. Celeste was stable but unresponsive. The doctors were running tests. Her family had been notified. Emmett thanked her and hung up. He stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, feeling the weight of everything he could not control pressing against his chest. Then he made a decision. He would go to the hospital. Every night. He would sit with her. He would talk to her. He would tell her all the things he had never dared to say. And if she could not hear him, at least he would have been honest. At least he would not have to live with the regret of things left unspoken. The next evening, after settling Willa at Mrs. Pemberton's house, Emmett drove to the hospital and took the elevator to the 9th floor. The ICU hallway was quiet, lit by fluorescent lights that hummed faintly above his head. A young nurse sat at the desk. She looked up when Emmett approached. He gave her Celeste's name, said he was her assistant. The nurse checked her records, frowned, told him that only family members were allowed in the ICU after 8. Emmett did not argue. He simply asked if he could sit in the waiting room nearby. The nurse studied him for a long moment, saw something in his face, then nodded. Emmett sat in the waiting room for 2 hours, watching the clock on the wall tick forward in slow mechanical increments. At 10, the nurse appeared in the doorway and gestured for him to follow. She led him down the hall to a private room at the end, pushed the door open quietly. 15 minutes, she said. I could lose my job for this. Emmett thanked her and stepped inside. The door closed softly behind him. Celeste lay in the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped and hummed in a steady rhythm. The monitors cast a soft glow across her features, without makeup, without the armor of her tailored suits. She looked younger, smaller. Her dark lashes rested against pale cheeks. Her chest rose and fell in the slow rhythm dictated by the ventilator. Emmett had never seen her like this. In the office, Celeste was a force of nature, a woman who made grown men stammer and competitors retreat. She filled every room she entered simply by existing. Now she seemed fragile, human, and the sight of it cracked open something in Emmett's chest that he had kept locked away for years. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. He did not touch her at first. He just looked at her and tried to reconcile the woman he knew with the woman lying in front of him. Then he began to talk. He told her about Willa's science project, about the upside-down rings on Saturn, about how his daughter had insisted it was still correct because Saturn did not care which way its rings faced. He told her about the eggs he made every morning, always slightly overcooked because he got distracted watching Willa explain whatever random fact she had learned the day before. He told her about Margot, about how they had met in college, about their small wedding in a courthouse with only 2 witnesses, about the way she used to hum while cooking dinner. He told her about the morning Margot died, about finding her on the kitchen floor, about the ambulance that came too late, about the year of grief that followed when he could barely get out of bed, when he went through the motions of living only because Willa needed him to. He told her that he had learned to live with loss by understanding that love did not end when someone left. It transformed. It became memory. It became habit. It became the small acts of care that kept a person alive in the world even after they were gone. He told her that he had been afraid to love again. And then he had met her, and fear had not mattered anymore. Emmett went back every night. He coordinated with Mrs. Pemberton, who asked no questions and simply told him to take whatever time he needed. Each night, Emmett sat in the waiting room until the sympathetic nurse let him in. And each night, he spent 15 minutes talking to Celeste as if she could hear him. He told her stories about his childhood in a small town in Ohio, about his father who worked double shifts at the factory, about his mother who taught 3rd grade for 30 years and still remembered every student's name. He told her about the first time he held Willa in the hospital, about how small she was, about how terrified he had been, about how the terror had transformed into wonder the moment she wrapped her tiny fingers around his thumb. He told her things he had never told anyone. He told her that sometimes he felt like a ghost, that sometimes he wondered if his life mattered to anyone outside of Willa. He told her that working for her had given him purpose, that watching her build something extraordinary had made him feel like he was part of something larger than himself. He told her that he admired her, that he respected her, that he had fallen in love with her without ever intending to. And on the 7th night at 2 in the morning, Emmett finally stopped pretending. He knelt beside her bed, took her hand in both of his, and let the truth spill out like water breaking through a dam. He told her about the first time he saw her, how she had walked into the conference room 3 years ago, and the air itself had changed, how he had spent 1,000 days memorizing the way she frowned at disappointing numbers, the way her voice softened when she spoke to the cleaning staff after hours, thinking no one could hear. He told her that loving her had never been a burden. It had been a privilege, the single brightest thread in the fabric of his ordinary life. He told her about the moment before the truck hit, how time had stretched like taffy, how he had seen the trajectory and understood what it meant. How choosing her had not felt like sacrifice. It had felt like the only possible answer. He told her that she owed him nothing, that he expected nothing in return, that if she never woke up, he would spend the rest of his life grateful for the 3 years he had been allowed to exist in her orbit. But if she did wake up, if by some miracle she opened her eyes and wanted him there, he would stay for as long as she would let him. Inside the darkness behind her closed eyes, Celeste heard everything. She existed in a twilight prison, aware of every word, every confession, every whispered hope, feeling Emmett's hand warm against her cold fingers, unable to respond. At first, she had not understood who was speaking. The voice was familiar, but out of context, like hearing a song in a place where music should not exist. Then she had recognized him. Emmett, her assistant, the man who brought her coffee and rescheduled her meetings, the man who existed in the background of her life like furniture she had stopped noticing. But the words he spoke did not match the role she had assigned him. He was not talking about work. He was talking about his daughter, his wife, his grief, his love. And Celeste, who had spent her entire adult life building walls around herself, felt those walls begin to crumble. She had never let anyone close. She had learned early that attachment was weakness, that people left, that trusting someone meant giving them the power to destroy you. Her father had died without warning. Her mother had responded by turning to stone. Her brother had made every interaction a competition. She had built Ashford Industries alone, without help, without partnership, without love. It had been her shield, her fortress, her proof that she did not need anyone. And now in the dark space of her imprisoned mind, Celeste listened to Emmett Hartwell tell her that she was loved. She listened to him describe the ordinary details of his life with a tenderness that made her ache. She listened to him confess that he had been unseen by her, and she realized with a sharp, painful clarity that he was right. She had never seen him. Not really. She had used him, taken his competence for granted, never once asked who he was beyond his function. But he had seen her. He had seen her exhaustion, her loneliness, her fear. And instead of exploiting those weaknesses, he had loved her quietly, without expectation, without demand. And when the moment came, he had thrown himself between her and death. Celeste wanted to wake up, wanted to open her eyes and tell him she heard, tell him she understood, tell him she was sorry for every time she had looked through him as if he were made of glass. But her body refused to obey. The darkness held her prisoner, and the helplessness was worse than any battle she had ever fought. On the 10th night, Celeste's mother and brother arrived. Emmett was in the waiting room when he heard their voices in the hallway. Sharp, authoritative, the voices of people accustomed to being obeyed. Genevieve Ashford was in her mid-60s, impeccably dressed in a designer suit, silver hair styled perfectly, the kind of beauty that had been maintained through discipline and expense. She moved like a woman who had never been told no. Sterling Ashford walked beside her, 40 years old, tall and lean with the same cold intelligence that ran in the family. His eyes scanned the hallway with calculation, assessing everything and everyone. They swept into the ICU like they owned it, and in a sense they did. Money bought access. Money bought deference. Money bought the right to make decisions about other people's lives. Emmett stayed in the waiting room, listening. He heard Genevieve demand updates from the doctors, heard Sterling request second opinions from specialists, heard them discuss Celeste's care as if she were a business asset that needed managing. No one mentioned love. No one expressed grief. But then Emmett heard something that turned his blood to ice. Sterling had stepped away from his mother, was speaking quietly into his phone, but not quietly enough. If she does not wake up in 2 weeks, I can petition for medical power of attorney. With mother's support, I will control Ashford Industries by the end of the month. Then we can finally fix father's mistake. Emmett stood frozen in the waiting room doorway, Sterling was not worried about his sister. He was waiting for her to die. Or worse, he was counting on it. A few minutes later, the phone call ended. Genevieve announced to the hospital staff that they would be limiting visitors to immediate family only. No employees, no friends, no exceptions. Emmett's heart dropped. He stood and walked to the nurse's desk, where Genevieve and Sterling were issuing orders. He introduced himself calmly as Celeste's executive assistant. Genevieve turned to look at him. Her eyes swept over his wrinkled shirt, his tired face, his obvious injuries from the accident. She looked at him the way someone might look at an insect on expensive fabric. "Your services are no longer needed," she said. "The family will handle Celeste's care. Return to the office and focus on keeping the company running in her absence. That is the most useful thing you can do." Emmett tried to explain. He told her he had been visiting Celeste every night, that he believed she could hear him, that he wanted to be there when she woke up. Genevieve cut him off with a raised hand. "You are an employee, not family. Your presence here is inappropriate and unwelcome." Sterling added with a thin smile that if Emmett had concerns about his job security, he should speak to human resources. Then they turned away, dismissing him as if he had never spoken. Emmett stood in the hallway and felt 3 years of quiet love harden into something cold, something desperate. He could not leave. He could not walk away knowing that Celeste was alone with people who saw her as an obstacle rather than a person, a legacy to control rather than a sister to save. But he had no power here, no legal standing, no claim. He was exactly what they said he was, an employee, a nobody, disposable. He went back to the waiting room and sat down. He stayed there until the nurses changed shifts, until the hallways emptied, until the hospital settled into the deep quiet of early morning. Then he walked back to Celeste's room one last time. The door was closed but not locked. He pushed it open and stepped inside. Nothing had changed. The same steady beep of monitors, the same antiseptic smell, the same woman who had commanded empires now lying motionless beneath thin hospital blankets. Emmett moved to the side of the bed, memorized the shape of her face, the curve of her jaw, the way her hair spread across the pillow. He reached out and took her hand, feeling the coolness of her skin against his palm. "I have to go," he said quietly. "Your family's here now. They do not want me around, and I have no right to fight them." He paused, swallowed hard. "I understand. I am just your assistant. I know that. But I need you to know something before I leave." He leaned closer. "I love you, Celeste. I have always loved you. And if you wake up and need me, I will be there. Just call. Just say the word. I will come." He let go of her hand, stepped back from the bed, turned toward the door. Inside the darkness, Celeste screamed his name. She poured every ounce of her will into moving, into speaking, into doing anything that would keep him from leaving. She focused everything she had on a single finger, one movement, just a twitch. Enough to let him know she was there, enough to make him stay. Her finger moved, barely perceptible, a tremor more than emotion. But Emmett, walking toward the door in the dim light, did not see it. He stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind him. And Celeste, trapped in her silent prison, felt something she had not experienced in decades: despair. Emmett made it to the elevator before he stopped. His hand was on the button, his ribs aching from the walk, his mind already calculating how he would explain all of this to Willa. But something held him in place, something he could not name. Not hope, not logic, just the stubborn, irrational certainty that leaving now would be the worst mistake of his life. He had already made a choice once, in a half second before the truck hit. When instinct and love had merged into a single action, he had thrown himself between Celeste and death without hesitation. Walking away now would undo that choice. It would mean that saving her had been reflex rather than devotion, Obligation rather than love. Emmett turned around. He walked back down the hallway, past the nurse's desk, past the waiting room. He pushed open the door to Celeste's room and stepped inside. And what he saw made him freeze. Celeste's eyes were open. She was staring at the ceiling, her breathing shallow and quick, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket with white knuckles. The machines around her beeped faster, registering the change. Emmett crossed the room in 3 strides. Celeste! Her eyes moved toward him slowly, as if the effort cost her everything she had. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Emmett reached for the call button, his hands shaking, but Celeste's fingers closed around his wrist. The grip was weak, but unmistakable. She was trying to tell him something, trying to keep him there. Emmett sat down on the edge of the bed and took her hand in both of his. "Do not try to talk," he said. "The doctors are coming. You are going to be fine." But Celeste shook her head. The movement was small and labored. Her lips formed words that did not make sound. Emmett leaned closer, trying to understand. Finally, in a voice that was barely a whisper, Celeste said 3 words that changed everything. "I heard you." Emmett went still. "All of it," she continued, her voice growing slightly stronger. "Every night, every word, every confession." The world narrowed to the sound of her breathing, the faint pressure of her hand in his, the way her eyes held his with an intensity that felt like falling off a cliff. "I was awake," she whispered, "inside, the whole time, screaming for you to stay, unable to move." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I heard everything." The medical team arrived moments later. Doctors and nurses flooded the room, pushed Emmett aside, began checking Celeste's vitals, running tests, asking questions. But through all of it, Celeste never took her eyes off him. When the chaos finally settled, when the doctors stepped back, satisfied that she was stable, the lead physician told Emmett he would need to leave so the patient could rest. Emmett nodded and started toward the door. Celeste said his name. The doctor turned, surprised. "Emmett stays," Celeste said. Her voice was weak but clear. "He stays." The doctor hesitated, looked at Emmett, then at Celeste. Something passed between the women. An understanding. The doctor nodded, left. The door closed, and Emmett and Celeste were alone. She spoke first. "I am sorry." Emmett started to protest, but she stopped him with a weak shake of her head. "Let me finish. I need to say this." She took a breath, gathering strength. "I am sorry for not seeing you. For 3 years you stood beside me and I never once looked. Never asked who you were, never wondered what you wanted, never treated you like a person." Her voice cracked. "I heard every story you told me in the dark. About Willa, about Margot, about your childhood, about who you are." She paused. "And I realized something. You saw me, the real me, not the CEO, not the reputation. You saw through all of it, and instead of using what you saw, you loved me." Tears streamed down her face now. "I do not deserve that. I have never deserved it. But I heard it, and it changed something inside me." Emmett moved closer, took her hand again. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said. "I chose to love you. I chose to stay. I chose to walk into that hospital room every night knowing you might never know I was there. Those were my choices, and I do not regret them. But you should not have had to make them," Celeste whispered. "And there is something else, something important." She met his eyes. "The accident. I do not think it was an accident." Emmett's grip tightened. "2 months ago, I changed my will," Celeste continued. "I was tired of Sterling's threats, tired of his manipulation, so I changed everything. If anything happens to me, my shares go to a charitable trust. Not to him, not to my mother, to charity." She paused. "Sterling was furious when he found out. We had a terrible fight. He said I was betraying the family. I told him the family had never existed, not the way he imagined it. Her eyes darkened. And now, if I am incapacitated, if I cannot make decisions, Sterling can petition for medical power of attorney, and with our mother's support, he would control everything. Emmett remembered the phone call he had overheard. Sterling's voice, cold, calculating, counting down the days. He is planning to do exactly that, Emmett said. Then we need to stop him. Over the next several days, while Celeste regained her strength, Emmett worked to gather evidence. The police had closed the accident investigation. Drunk driver, open and shut case. But Emmett pushed deeper. He made calls, asked questions, followed the money trail with the help of a forensic accountant Celeste trusted. And what they found confirmed their worst suspicions. The drunk driver had received $50,000 in cash 2 days before the accident. The money had been withdrawn from a subsidiary account that Sterling controlled. A shell company designed to hide transactions. It was not proof that would guarantee a conviction. Not yet. But it was enough to act. Celeste called an emergency board meeting. Right there in the hospital, she was still weak, still recovering, but her mind was sharp as ever, and her determination had never wavered. The boardroom was set up in the VIP wing, chairs arranged in a semicircle around her bed. Medical equipment pushed to the side. Celeste sat propped against pillows, pale but fierce. Genevieve and Sterling arrived expecting a discussion about temporary leadership, about who would run things while Celeste recovered, about the future of the company. What they got was something else entirely. Emmett stood in the corner of the room as Celeste presented her evidence. The financial records, the bank transfers, the shell company, the timeline that connected Sterling to the drunk driver. Sterling's face transformed as she spoke, confident to confused, confused to pale, pale to desperate. "This is absurd," he said. "I would never hurt my own sister. This is a fabrication, a manipulation. She is clearly not well. The head injury has affected her judgment." Celeste looked at him with eyes that held no warmth, no sisterly affection, only the cold clarity of truth. "You have been trying to take this company from me for 20 years. Father knew it. That is why he left the shares to me. He saw what you are, a parasite, a pretender, someone who would rather destroy than build." The door opened. 2 FBI agents stepped into the room. "Sterling Ashford," one of them said, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder." Sterling turned to his mother, his composure finally cracking. "Mother, do something. Tell them this is insane." But Genevieve said nothing. She sat perfectly still, her face a mask, watching as her son was handcuffed, as he was read his rights, as he was led from the room like a common criminal. When the door closed behind them, Celeste turned to her mother. "You knew." It was not a question. "Maybe not about the truck," Celeste continued, "but you knew he wanted me gone. You saw the signs for years, and you looked the other way. You enabled him. You always have." Genevieve's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I did what I thought was best for the family. Sterling was supposed to lead. Your father made a mistake leaving those shares to you. I was trying to correct it. By letting him destroy me?" Silence stretched between them. "I never thought he would go this far," Genevieve finally said. But there was no remorse in her voice, only the cold calculation of a woman realizing her chess piece had been captured. "Get out," Celeste said. Genevieve stood, smoothed her skirt, walked to the door with the same rigid posture she had maintained for 65 years. She did not look back, and Celeste understood, finally, that she had never had a mother. Only a woman who had chosen her golden son over her inconvenient daughter. Every single time. The door clicked shut, and Celeste felt something she had not expected. Relief. For a long moment after everyone left, the room was silent. Then Emmett moved to her side, took her hand. "It is over," he said. Celeste shook her head slowly. "No, it is just beginning." She looked up at him, her eyes red from tears, her face exhausted but peaceful. "You saved my life twice," she said. "Once when you turned the wheel, and once when you refused to give up on me." "I would do it again," Emmett said. 1,000 times. 1,000,000. "I know." She almost smiled. "That terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I have spent my whole life making sure no one had that kind of power over me. And now you do. And I do not know what to do with that." Emmett sat down on the edge of her bed, still holding her hand. "You do not have to do anything with it," he said. "Love is not about power. It is not about control. It is about showing up every day in small ways, making breakfast, reading bedtime stories, being there when things fall apart." He paused. "I do not want power over you, Celeste. I just want to be there for whatever comes next." She was quiet for a long moment. "Tell me about Willa," she finally said. Emmett smiled, the first real smile in days. "She wants to meet you. She's been asking every day since the accident. She made you a card, drew a picture of what she thinks you look like." He laughed softly. "She gave you purple hair." Celeste's lips curved upward. "I have always wanted purple hair." She said something else, something I cannot stop thinking about. "What?" Emmett's voice softened. "She said that broken pieces can still make something whole, like her solar system project. She glued Saturn's rings on upside down. But it was still Saturn, just a different kind of beautiful." Celeste's eyes filled with tears. "She sounds wise." "She is, wiser than me most days." A pause. "I would like to meet her," Celeste said quietly, "if that is okay." "She would love that. She has already decided you are a princess who fights dragons." Celeste laughed, a real laugh, light and surprised. "I am not sure I live up to that." "You do," Emmett said. "You absolutely do." 1 year later, Celeste Ashford woke to the sound of Emmett moving around the kitchen. She lay still for a moment, listening. The clatter of pans, the sizzle of eggs. Willa's voice asking questions about volcanoes. Ordinary sounds. The soundtrack of an ordinary morning. She had never known how beautiful ordinary could be. Celeste got out of bed and pulled on a soft sweater. Walked downstairs barefoot. The hardwood floors were cool beneath her feet. The wedding ring on her finger caught the morning light. Willa sat at the kitchen table, working on a new science project. A model volcano this time, papier-mâché and red paint, and an elaborate plan involving baking soda. "Mom," Willa called without looking up. "Can you help me with the lava? I want it to look really real." "Mom." Celeste still was not entirely used to that word, but every time she heard it, something warm spread through her chest, something that felt like healing. "Of course, sweetheart. Let me see what we are working with." She sat down beside Willa and examined the volcano. It was lopsided, covered in lumpy brown paint. Absolutely perfect. Emmett set a plate of scrambled eggs in front of Celeste, slightly overcooked, just like always. He had never quite mastered the timing. She smiled and took a bite. It was delicious. "You know," Willa said, looking up from her volcano, "I was thinking about what I said a long time ago, about broken pieces." "What about it?" Celeste asked. "I was right, was I not?" Willa grinned. Her gap-toothed smile was the most beautiful thing Celeste had ever seen. "We are all broken pieces, but we fit together. We make something whole, something different." She paused, considering her own wisdom with the seriousness only a 7-year-old could muster. "A different kind of beautiful," she concluded. Emmett sat down at the table, reached for Celeste's hand. She took it, held on tight. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up." for seeing me when I could not see myself, for teaching me that love is not about power or protection or keeping score. She looked at him, at Willa, at the messy kitchen and the lopsided volcano and the overcooked eggs, for teaching me that it is about showing up, every day, in small ways. Emmett smiled, that quiet smile that had made her fall in love with him without realizing it. Scrambled eggs and science projects? He asked. Scrambled eggs and science projects, she agreed. Willa groaned dramatically. Are you two going to be mushy all the time now? Because I have a volcano to finish, and it is hard to concentrate when you are being gross. Celeste laughed, a real laugh, full and free. Probably, she admitted. Definitely, Emmett added. Ugh, Willa said, but she was smiling. Celeste looked around the small kitchen, at the model volcano drying on newspaper, at the eggs on her plate, at the man who had loved her quietly for 3 years, at the little girl who had somehow become her daughter. She had spent her whole life building an empire, accumulating power, constructing walls to protect herself from the vulnerability she had been taught to fear. But sitting here, in this ordinary kitchen, eating overcooked eggs on a Sunday morning, Celeste finally understood what she had been missing all along. The most terrifying thing had never been death. It had never been loss. It had never been even her own brother trying to kill her. The most terrifying thing had been the possibility of living an entire life without ever knowing what it felt like to be loved like this, quietly, steadily, without conditions or expectations. Emmett Hartwell, the man who had been unseen by her for 3 years, had taught her that strength was not about walls. It was about letting someone in. And Willa, her daughter now, had taught her that broken pieces could still make something whole. They were not perfect. They were not even close. But they were a different kind of beautiful. And that was everything. That was enough.